Ya, bacán. Se debería escuchar algo. O al menos se debería escuchar algo desde acá. Ya, bacán. Se debería escuchar algo. Bueno, el
O al
objetivo
menos
del
se debería
stream,
escuchar algo desde acá.
estoy
Ya, bacán.
probando a ver
Se debería
si es que este formato puede funcionar. Usualmente estoy buscando actualizar cualquier tipo de conocimiento que tenga. En este caso, el... salió este workshop que va a estar gratis hasta... Ah, lo habían puesto hasta final de diciembre, pero al parecer ahora va a estar hasta enero 16. Entonces quería chequearlo, no necesariamente para seguirlo al pie de la letra, pero sí para aprender cuál es el estado, ¿no? De estas herramientas de rigging en Unreal. Pero sí para aprender. Así que esa es la misión del día de hoy. Y bueno, en lo que veo y escucho, voy a estar haciendo otras cosas acá porque algunas cosas, sobre todo al inicio, ya me he visto estos dos primeros videos. Y habían cosas básicas, habían eh, dos tips que sí no los tenía en cuenta. Así que, de todas maneras, siempre es bueno, a pesar de que ya sabes algo, ¿no? Empezar desde cero y revisar. Ya, sí. mm, Esta es la forma que me lo quieres enseñar. Está bien. Me mantendré inocente y aprenderé lo que de la forma que me lo quieres enseñar, ¿no? Porque estoy imaginando que por algo lo están enseñando así. Entonces, voy a empezar con este tercer video. El primer video era básicamente cosas básicas dentro de Unreal, cómo utilizar el viewport, cómo utilizar, eh, arrastrar assets, qué significa un skeletal mesh, huesos, los tipos de assets, skeleton, skeletal mesh, el physics assets, etcétera, ¿no? Entonces, era bastante cosa muy simple. Y si me olvidé de hacer, era en algún lado poner el chat. En algún lado. Entonces, si está por acá, creo. Sí, sí está por acá. Acá. Y este chat lo pondré por acá. Ya, excelente. Y bueno, es cosa de poner el
Right,
video
so this is going to be a tech primer. Look behind the
a ver qué se
curtain
cuenta.
briefly and sort of trying to highlight some of the technical aspects of Control Rig and the aforementioned Rig VM, the backbone of Control Rig. I will go over that briefly and trying to sort of give you a good understanding. Again, don't try to memorize all of it. Try to sort of be inspired and take some of these things with you. So, Sarah, do you want to start? Introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Sarah Schwartzman. I'm a senior animation programmer in UE. I'm basically focusing on building Control Rig and how it integrates in the system, in the engine. That's it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Helge Mate. I'm the principal animation programmer in the Control Rig team and sort of also wear the head of the dev owner, which means that most, or if not all, design decisions on the system sort of cross my desk. And Chase alluded to this earlier. I've been with the company for a bit more than 7 years now. And yeah, I've been working on this from the very beginning. So I'm super stoked that we're doing this workshop finally. Control Rig has been growing for a while, and we're happy that we're finally there to sort of answer to you guys' requirements and different sets of projects and different kinds of industries. So it's super exciting. So take a step back and talk about why we're even having this section. Why do we talk about the background, the backbone behind control rig. So as I'm sure many of you know, rigging animation hasn't actually evolved a lot. Many systems rely on dependency graphs, and with that, most of our thinking, how we sort of think about rigging and rig evaluation, is governed by dependency graphs. So, you know, most riggers' knowledge and sort of atoms they think about are nodes that are wired together in a DG, and so that is a common theme we've noticed. On top of that,
Cierto.
you know, because rigging animation workflows within the pipeline sit at a central place, and because most CG production companies or game companies build pipelines on top of tools like Maya or Blender with Python, it's relatively difficult to change that piece of the pipeline. So we haven't seen drastic and regressive changes in the last 25 years. And, you know, of course, there is progress. So lots of large CG houses may have proprietary tools that you may have seen in like Pixar, DreamWorks, and others, of course. And there's also individuals, right, that have built quite paradigm-changing approaches, like the ephemeral rigging tools built by Raffenzoven and others. So there's something happening, but in general, I'd say that the off-the-shelf software that is available to you hasn't changed all that much. And
Cierto.
so what we've done is sort of
Muchos
assemble a team
tutoriales de
with
rigging que
backgrounds
se
from
lanzaron hace
all
10
across
años
the
siguen siendo
industry.
bastante
So, you
útiles
know,
ahora.
with Jeremy, we have the author of M Gear in the team. We have people from DreamWorks, you know, ILM and the Xenograph, Softimage, side effects, and so on in here. So it's been really interesting to, you know, create a roundtable and trying to understand what's going on, why haven't things evolved much, and how can we try to make this better. And one of the things we found is that it sort of comes back to the execution system. Most tools rely on DGs, and DGs are actually not that good for pose computation in characters, and it's because, you know, DGs are built to sort of be lazy evaluation. You know, only compute the node as necessary, and for deformation and things like that, it's actually quite good. But for animation, it's not that great because, you know, most things change in a frame, so DGs become the limiting factor. So we try to rethink this and make it faster. The other thing is, from the get-go, we knew we would have to cater to a variety of audiences, right? So we have very different use cases, from film to games. Things like architecture and automotive want to use characters in a different way again. So we knew we had to sort of cater towards super high performance requirements from games and complexity requirements from film, for example.
Y eso es algo bastante chévere que hacen Epic Games. Porque ellos están haciendo Fortnite, ¿no? Están haciendo juegos. Y no solamente eso, sino tienen un plan de soporte a desarrolladores que tú puedes pagar como para hacer consultoría con ellos. Claramente eso cuesta un montón. Creo que era por una cuenta, ¿cómo era? No sé si era 2.500 al mes, una cosa así, pero era como un plan largo, entonces cuesta. Pero lo bacán de eso es que constantemente están hablando con gente de la industria, constantemente están al tanto, ¿no? De lo que se necesita ahora y a veces los meten problemas porque sacan una solución a algo que están viendo que es un problema ahora y que en el futuro se puede resolver de cierta manera, pero por ejemplo, Nanite lo sacaron, ¿no? Para resolver ese problema, el problema específico, ¿no? De bajar los polígonos y todo eso. Pero digamos que el hardware del consumidor no está ahí, ¿no? Ese es el problema actual de la gente que está como que realizando proyectos que están en el filo de la innovación. Entonces, a veces la solución que sacan no se adapta mucho al mercado actual, pero es porque están realmente como que al límite de la innovación. Pero poco a poco va mejorando la tecnología, ¿no? Ya hay Nanite para Foliage finalmente. Entonces es otra evolución del workflow que quizás estudios como CD Projekt Red ya lo tenían, ¿no? Y por eso pueden mostrar su, su demo de Witcher 4 corriendo en una Play. Mientras que juegos que salen ahora, que parecen más pequeños, como que las sufren bastante, ¿no? con el tema de optimización, pero bueno, el punto era que lo bacán es que siempre están hablando con los profesionales actuales, que tienen los problemas ahora, ¿no? Entonces, constantemente eso hace que saquen herramientas
So let's take a
bastante
quick step
avanzadas,
back
¿no?
and talk about what control rig is. This is going to be super low level. Of course, this week is about this subject, so there's going to be much more high level, how do you use all the tools and how does do all the things work across the week, but we want to take a sort of a technical overview first. So control
Está
rig
bien.
uses a
Buen
graph
overview.
to build what we call VM bytecode. So the idea is that you work in a familiar system, familiar environment. You add nodes, you add wires between the nodes and so on. But what really happens in the backend is we compile these nodes to bytecode. So sort of a linear instruction set that we know we need to run to compute the pose of the character. And that's really important to understand. So the graph you see isn't what's running, right? So it's a very different from what you'd see in something like Maya.
Okay. Ah, era su video, pensé que era
There we
el
go.
mío.
So in this video, we've seen this character before today already. We're looking at a straightforward rig there with some features. There's somebody has built this graph on the right that you can see. The other thing I want to highlight is that on the bottom left, we have the execution stack, which is the window that sort of shows you that compiled down list of instructions that need to run when the character pose is being computed. And there's a correspondence. So if I select a node, it will show me the instruction or instructions that are represented by the node. And if I select instructions, I'll be brought to the nodes that affect these things. So it's important to understand that you can sort of introspect this and figure out what's going on. We also ship with a heat map profiler, so it can enable profiling in the class settings. And that will then show me a sort of a heat map in the graph and microsecond measurements for each one of the instructions. At the very bottom left, you can see that just roughly around a microsecond, a millisecond, so about 1100 microseconds in average for this whole rig. And that is sort of important to understand that we built this for performance, and we also give you profiling tools to help you understand where time is spent quite aggressively to tune things for high performance requirement scenarios. Another topic I wanted to cover is that control rig separates the logic, so what needs to run, from the hierarchy. So what does it need to run on? Those two things are split up in control rig completely. That is a challenge initially, sort of mentally to understand, but this is what gives us lots of flexibility. So it does mean that you can use multiple rigs on a hierarchy, different ones. It also means you can use the same rig on multiple hierarchies. It also means you can use multiple rigs on one hierarchy. So this is quite different than what you would usually see in the
Man.
classical DCC. So let's take a quick look. In this video, we're going to look at one of the modules that we ship, the ARM module. So it's purposefully simple what I'm trying to convey here. And what I'm doing is I'm changing the characters I'm running this module on. So what the rig is doing is sort of mapping itself onto the topology that it sees. It tries to find the bones based on names in this case and tries to remap itself, so you can sort of see those tags there in the rig hierarchy telling you that the module has resolved to these bones, so I can try the rig immediately. And notice how this character is a bit different from the one before. So this has 5 spine bones, and I'll just be changing it to another one now, which is the Bungee Man from Jeremy Passeron. Think anyway. Yeah, this guy has 4 spine bones, so it's not a massive difference, but it's a slightly different character. So I was just highlighting that the same rig can operate on a different skeleton.
Todo bien con
And
eso.
finally, I'm going to switch to a completely different hierarchy, which is this mech. So the mech doesn't even have a spine, of course. We've mapped out the bones using connectors here as well. And you can see how I've mapped it against the leg there, and I can use the same exact rig. And pose up the leg. So again, super simple rig, of course. The point I'm trying to convey is that the hierarchy is split up from the logic, and so that means you can run the same rig on multiple characters. And so in something like Maya, this is a purposefully a simple screenshot from Maya. The hierarchy nodes, like a bone or a locator, are nodes in the hypergraph, as are the computation nodes. And so these wires that you plant or build when you build these rigs, they're fixed, right, at runtime. And that limits what you can do with the rig. With divorcing these things, now we have lots of new possibilities. So it doesn't mean that we can have parts of rigs that only run sometimes. So not adding any cost to rigs if not needed. We can loop over data. So you can say we build a part of the graph that will solve all the fingers or all the limbs. We can have rigs that do major phases, like you first run a full body IK, say, to do a rough pose up using full body IK, and then run a ragdoll physics after that, and then run a normal rig. You can also have things that only run during interaction. So you can build logic that is only happening when the animator actually interacts with the control to change the experience, and many other things. So this is great in terms of flexibility, but it's also a challenge because it's quite different from what you may be used to. So in this example, don't try to sort of, memorize the whole graph. But what I'm trying to show here is that this graph actually does IK and FK one after another without adding more bones. So it just says, I'm going to solve IK first, and then I'm going to blend all the relevant bones back to FK given the weight. So because we can run two computes one after another without having to introduce duplicates of bones and copies, we have much more flexibility. I mean, I'm sure many of you in this webinar have gone through the process a dozen of times of creating an IK bone chain, an FK bone chain, and a third one that is blended between the two. So this is a simple example of being able to do IK and FK with a blend on any bone chain, on any two bone, I should say in this case, without changing the hierarchy. And as part of that previous graph, this is just a larger section for the lower part from the one before. I'm using a loop here as well, just to say, here's three controls, find the corresponding bones in the FK, the FK formula, and set their rotation. So the reason I'm showing this is that it does mean that as you change the data now, you can change what bones get affected. So you don't need to add more nodes to affect more things. Again, sort of a very different scheme than what you may have seen. With this, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to talk you through control rig graph events and modular rigs.
Ahí está.
Yep.
Se viene lo
Helge.
bueno.
So I'm going to take what Helge just explained, and I'm going to expand a little bit. So Helge explained a little bit about the execution stack that is created with all the set of instructions that are created from the graph. Now, that is what we call the bytecode. And the bytecode is a set of instructions, like I said, and it's built on top of some pillars that we call graph events. So the graph events are a certain set of instructions that are executed at different times. On your typical DG-based rig, usually you actually only have, like, in theory, like a single event that runs all the time. But in control rig, we have these different events that run at different times depending on what the rig is doing. So here are, for example, some events that we predefine for you. There are more than these, but I just want to keep it simple for now. And you even can create your own user-defined events, and you can trigger them anywhere in the graph to, for example, reuse logic and modularize a little bit your graphs. So I'm going to go through all of these events in the next slides. We have the forward solve, which looks, but wait, can you go back a little bit? The forward solve will look very familiar to you. Then we have the construction event that's also maybe rings a bell, and the backward solve. I want to pause a little bit on the interaction event. Even though it says optional, actually all of these events are optional. You can see rigs that don't have any events in some cases, like on control rig function libraries that you will see in a few days. But the interaction event is an interesting one that is executed only while the user is manipulating or controlling the viewport. So you can imagine in the interaction event, you can detect which control is being manipulated and how it is being manipulated, and you you can react in real time to that manipulation, maybe changing the color of the control or moving other controls, etc. And that's actually a very powerful feature that we have. So, okay, now let's see the forward solve. Sorry. So this is what most riggers are familiar with, right? You are moving the bones, giving a set of controls, right? Basically, you are posing the rig based on the transforms of some controls.
Si tan solo fuera un
But
rigger.
it's not limited to that. You can really do whatever you want. The sky's the limit with the forward solve. Let's see the next one. It's more interesting. The construction event. So the construction event runs when the rig is initialized. Here, you would set up the rig's initial state, position your controls, set the default values, and you can even spawn elements procedurally. So based on, let's say, some variables or the skeleton that you are given, you can spawn some controls that are different given the data that is the input, right? So basically, with the same rig, you can produce different controls. Now, usually in other DCCs, like in Maya, you would usually do this with Python scripts. But here we have introduced this as its own graph in control rig with its logic. So you don't have to change context here. That is a first-class citizen. Okay, so let's move on to the backward solve. What is the backward solve? So you can think of...
Ese es un clasicazo de Epic. Claro, deberías aprender Maya. En otros, por ejemplo, perdón, deberías aprender Python. En Maya, ahí usualmente le metes Python para riguear. Sí he visto y sí empecé a buscar cómo hacer esas cosas, pero se complicó un poco la situación y dije, no quiero volver un maestro de Maya, así que lo abandoné, ¿no? Pero ahora que lo han traído en Real, quizá cambia. Entonces vamos a ver qué es el backward solve.
The backward solve as what runs when you're, for example, baking animation into the rig. So you're giving a pose, a rig pose, and you're setting the transforms of your controls. This event is required when you're baking animation, like how Benoit showed you in Sequencer. You could pick an animation and make it to a control rig. It would run this backward solve for each frame, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't see your control rig in the list of available control rigs, it's probably because you haven't defined your backward solve yet. It's a very common mistake. You can also, in Sequencer, something that Benoit didn't mention is that you can have something called a layered control rig, where you have an animation and you have your control rig, and it's going to run the backward solve before applying additive transforms to your controls and then running the forward solve. So it's a way of adding animation on top of another animation. So that's where the backward solve is used, basically. Okay, so let's see. Let's shift gears a little bit, because now I want to talk about, so up until now, we have been talking about a control rig as a standalone rig. And Helge did briefly mention an ARM module, but let's dig in a little bit more on what that means. So we usually have three types of rig asset that you can build in Unreal. One is a control rig. That's what we've been talking about. Another one is a rig module, and another one is a modular rig. Now, the control rig and the rig module are very similar. They both have a graph. The editor looks very similar. But the modular rig is very different. When you open a modular rig, you won't see a graph. What you see is the viewport, basically. And a tree of rig modules that are connected to each other through connectors. And what we aim for is for you to basically stay on the viewport. And you'll also have a module browser that has all the modules that exist in your project. And you will be able to drag and drop from the browser to the viewport, and we will hopefully be able to connect the connectors into your module hierarchy so that they work well with each other. Okay, let's see. So I'm not going to go very deep on what that means, but just so you know the basics, what we've been talking about up till now are graph-based rigs, and these have events. You can edit the graph that will modify the rig, the bytecode, etc. And the modular rig can be used as any other control rig, like when you add a control rig into sequencer or into your animation blueprint, and you have to select the control rig, it can be a modular rig, and it doesn't matter if it's a modular rig or a control rig. You can use either of those. But it is defined on a higher level in the user interface. It does not contain a graph, and you're interacting directly with the schematic viewport. Yeah, next slide. So, like I said, we provide a module library. Chase is going to talk a little bit more and introduce you to some of the modules that we provide. Like I said, you can drag and drop the modules into an existing rig module hierarchy, and it will build the module hierarchy. Now, I just want to just very quickly explain to you how this modular rig works. Modular rigs is just a rig that has many control rigs inside, and they all share the same rig hierarchy. And when you execute an event on the modular rig, it will execute that event on its rig modules in a certain order. And that's basically it. There's really no more to it. It is connected, the rig modules are connected through connectors. And in these days, when you will be creating a rig module and a module rig, and I think some rig modules, you will see how the connectors are solved to find the connections between them. There's even an event called the connector event that you will be able to use so that to make it easier for this module to resolve two other modules. Okay. So very quickly, I want to talk a little bit about how to use control rig. Benoit has already talked about how to use it in sequencer. I already mentioned that you can also use it with layered control rigs. I also want to very quickly talk about how you could use it in an animation blueprint. We have this little control rig node that you can add and select your control rig class. And that's a way of using control rig during runtime. And we also have the control rig component that you can add to your blueprint together with the skeletal mesh. And yeah, it will. That's another way of using control rig during runtime. And I think I'm going to hand it back to Helge for the recap.
Thank you, Sarah. I was looking for the unmute button. All right, there you go. Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much. So yeah, as you may have noticed already, we're taking quite a different approach than what you may be familiar with from other environments. We've purposefully sort of broke the paradigms or introduced a new one rather to introduce more control, speed, and flexibility. And many of the benefits you'll learn about this week, are great and everything, but there's also some challenges. It's a relatively steep learning curve still, due to mainly being a very different mental model. It honestly requires you to sort of relearn certain things and forget about patterns you may be used to that you're just trying to apply. And that's sort of what this section is about, trying to prime your brain a bit that will be the case. And there's still lots to do. So control rig is still relatively young. There's lots of work ahead, mainly focusing on sort of debuggability and documentation. The underlying framework is solid in terms of execution, but to make it sort of super easy accessible, we still have some work to do. And that's it. I want to mention that I'll be in the lab later today, so if you have questions, you can fire them there. And I'm going to hand it back to James with this, I think, yeah? All right, so this is going to be a tech primer.
Bueno, por el momento todo muy bueno. Está con bastante potencial esto. Así que toca este que dice UE Basics, pero
Right, so we've been
de lo,
talking a
de lo que estaba escuchando era más el pipeline, que es una de las cosas que más me interesan para saber más o menos cuáles son esos pasos, ¿no?, que están tomando.
lot about ProRig and the sort of capabilities that we have and how the system works as a whole. I think now it's time for us to actually take a look at some practical examples. Essentially, I want to take you through the entire pipeline, for the entire process. So we're going to start with just a mesh. We'll create a skeleton for it. We'll do the weight painting, and then we'll go into actually making a control rig right after that. And yeah, so we're going to take a look at rigging in a Unreal Engine. So like I say, the agenda is we're going to take a look at skeletal mesh editing. So creating a skeletal mesh, adding bones, weight painting, all that kind of stuff. And then we're going to create a control rig using that mesh right afterwards. One thing to note is to open this project, if you don't have it in the launcher, you might want to go to wherever you have it saved. I think I have it on my desktop. I have too many of these. Yeah, so you'll notice that you basically have a folder that looks like this. It might not be super readable for you guys with this text. Can I make that bigger? Yeah. It should look a little bit like this, right?
Sí,
And
se
this
debería
is
escuchar.
basically this little blue or big blue
Opciones.
icon here. It's called the U project file that I was talking about before in my previous section. And like I say, this isn't the project itself. This is just like a portal into the project, so to speak, which is going to grab all the information that's in all these folders and put them together in the sort of display that you see here. So you to open this project, you can just double click this here, and you should be basically in the same layout that I have here.
Oh, sí.
One thing to note about the session today, I don't really expect anyone to follow along with this. I think there's just quite a lot of information that we're going to cover, and trying to follow along, especially if you've never done this stuff, is just going to be really hard. So I think just observe
Ahí
and
está.
try and absorb everything that I'm going to be talking about here, and we'll have the recordings later for you to kind of dig a little bit deeper and follow along if you need to. But yeah, I wouldn't try to follow along because I think it's going to be pretty easy to get lost. So with that said, the project that we have here has a few characters, and you'll notice here that we have a rigging workshop, and then we have an animations folder, and then we have per day the type of or a folder for the type of work that we're going to do. So for me, I'm going to be on day 1, James, but you'll see we have Ferris's workshops, also Jeremy's, and so. Day 1, James also has the finished workshop, so this is what I'm going to do today, and then the start, which is where you can go ahead and start working from, which is right here. It's just essentially a static mesh. And a static mesh in Unreal, if I double click it, all it is a mesh. Nothing else, nothing super special. By the way, when I've double clicked and opened this, we get a new viewport, we get new options in terms of materials and things like that that we can apply to the mesh. Not something that we need to worry about right now, but what I did want to show you is navigating these viewports exactly the same as the others. You might find that you move too quickly, right? You might find that you're kind of struggling to find where, like, to locate the character properly. You can press F to frame, but more importantly, if you change this little camera icon here, you can change the camera speed. So you can slow it down so that it's a little bit easier to find the character and the orbit around it. Importantly, if you want to change that on the fly, as I'm holding right click and using WASD, you can use your mouse wheel. You can see that value's climbing as I scroll up and then down. So that's going to essentially change the speed at which we can move, which is really handy to do dynamically as you move. But I digress. We have a static mesh here, and in order to be able to work with it with control rig and all that kind of stuff, we want to turn it into a skeletal mesh because that will allow us to give it bones, and then we'll build our control rig on top of that. So in order to change this or to create a skeletal mesh from it, I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to go to convert the skeletal mesh. Now you'll see we have a few options on the skeletal mesh conversion window. The first one is we have a destination path, so that's where it's going to save the new assets. And then remember, we have this concept of the skeleton that's a separate asset to the skeletal mesh. So we have here a whole section asking us about the skeleton that we're going to use for this. So we can create a new one, or we can use an existing skeleton, for example, and find a skeleton that would be suitable for this. In that case, we want to start from scratch, so we're just going to create a new skeleton. And it's going to ask us, where do you want the root bone? Because the first thing it's going to do when it creates a skeleton is just add a root bone. And I want it to be at the origin. That's essentially going to take the pivot of this mesh and put the root bone there. And that's precisely where I want it. After that, we have a few other options here.
Estándar.
So we have naming. So it's going to take a look at the names of the mesh that you're supplying. So in this case, SM_omega. SM standing for static mesh. And we can remove SM and turn it into SKM, which will be skeletal mesh. And then it's also giving you options for the skeleton here, which is going to give us a prefix of SK. So basically with this on default, I can go ahead and convert. And you'll see it's created two assets for me, which I'm just going to quickly save, just so that we're not crashes or anything like that. We can get back to it quickly.
Cool.
But yeah, you can see we have the skeletal mesh and the skeleton. If I open up the skeletal mesh, like you know, this handles the mesh itself. You can see we have a bunch of tools here already to start editing the skeleton and everything. But like I say, this is skeletal mesh. It's going to have material options, that kind of thing. We can access the skeleton on its own. So if we click this little skeleton button here, it's going to load up right behind this, apparently. It's going to load up the skeleton. And you can see this is a much simpler asset, right? It's just got a skeleton with the root bone there. A few options for the bone that I currently have selected. So remember, this mesh is referencing this skeleton, okay? And remember, like me clicking this little blue thing here, all it's doing is opening up the skeleton asset. It's not actually part of this asset itself. So, like I say, we're going to go through the process of creating a whole skeleton. Now, a lot of these tools are very much still in development, and you'll see there's a little bit of sort of like teething issues in terms of making life a little bit.
Es el clasicaza de, de la gente de Epic y sus nuevas herramientas. En la siguiente versión, de todas maneras van a cambiar de lugar algunas cosas, de todas maneras, porque conforme más gente está utilizando las cosas, más van a hacer cambios que mejoren, ¿no? esa interactividad o ese uso. Así que sí, usualmente si haces un tutorial de algo que acaba de salir recientemente, bueno, prepárate para tener que sacar otro en la siguiente versión porque a la gente le da ansiedad cuando, por ejemplo, el botón que estaba por este lado, pucha, cambia. Si estaba por el lado izquierdo y ahora lo pasaron para el lado derecho, uy, ya, problemas, ¿no? Pero ya, así es, así es.
A bit easier as we work on them, but you'll see that they're pretty robust already and they're very usable. So yeah, you could keep your entire sort of character pipeline directly in Unreal if you chose to do so. You could also just, for example, create a mesh with a skeleton in something like something like Maya or Blender or something like that and bring it in, that's also totally fine. But just know I kind of want to show you the whole process in Unreal so that you can kind of see where things are at and the state of the tool. So with that said, with the skeletal mesh open, I'm going to even close the skeleton. So I'm going to open up the skeletal mesh. And if you do not have these options here, you might not have the edit tools highlighted. So by default, I think they are highlighted, but if they're not, you can just click the editing tools here and you'll be basically in the same spot. And on the left-hand side here, we've got all our tools. And first of all, we want to start editing the skeleton. So if I press edit skeleton, you'll see I go into this sort of editing skeleton mode. And I have a few options, and we're going to go through basically everything as we build our skeleton here. So I can add or edit bones, and then we also have a vert selection toggle that's usable for both of these modes, and we'll take a look at how we're going to build that. So when it comes to how bones can be added, when I'm within the add panel or add option here, you'll notice that I have a projection of the joint that I'm going to create, and it says here within mesh. So if I click anywhere on the mesh, it's going to create a joint within it, right? Now, one slight issue that we have with this character is that it's been built with a lot of layers of geometry, kind of stacking one on top of another on top of another. So you see, like, for example, we have this visor, and then, more geometry underneath, and in here we have a hood that's like multiple layers of geometry. And that's kind of going to mess with the projector algorithm that we have here. So just keep that in mind, that if it's a little bit funky that you're trying to click here and it's not projecting to the center, that's because that's projecting to the center of the geometry that you see right there, right? That in between. There is a section here that is nice and clean. So I can just click in there and you'll see it projects to the center location that we have there. You also have the ability to project on the mesh, so on the actual surface, which is going to be quite handy for things like leaf joints and things like that. And then we also have camera plane aligned to the camera. So they're pretty self-explanatory. And then right below here, we have just the details of the joints that we're going to be creating and how we can work. Now, because we want to be fairly precise with a character like this, we have essentially a lot of articulation here that's got spheres as the sort of joints. So we want to be able to be accurate and placing them perfectly in the middle. There's another thing that we can do to handle this type of. So if I toggle on the select verts, this will allow me to essentially select a set of vertices like this. And if I press create, it's going to basically make that joint in the center of the selection that I had. So it's going to find the center of the volume of the selection that I had. And
Qué excelente, qué excelente. Eso está muy bueno. Lo complicado va a ser seleccionar los vértices que quieres, ¿no? Pero a ver si tiene sus grow tools por ahí. Creo que me lo perdí.
Create the joint. So if we want to build this out, I can go ahead, for example, and select the entire mesh, right? And I can press create, and you can see it'll create a joint right there. Now, you'll also notice a thing here that we're creating a joint, and it's got this sort of like red bone that's appearing here. And essentially, that red bone is kind of giving you the it's a bone that goes towards the origin. It's just a visualization of, how far away you are from the origin. And this is simply happening because this is a joint that currently isn't childed to the root, right? So it's just kind of telling you, hey, this joint's here, and the origin of the mesh is actually, or the root of the mesh, right? So if I want to, I can just drag this in on the outliner here and make it a child of the root joint, and you can see we now have a joint created there, pretty nicely central. Now you will notice that we have for this joint a few transforms here. So we have a location that you can see on X actually has a tiny value. I'm going to go ahead and zero that out because the mesh doesn't seem to be perfectly symmetrical. So I'm going to make sure that it's at 0 so that we are kind of at 0 from a symmetry standpoint. The rest is kind of okay, I think. Yeah, that seems fairly central to the volume to me. And then you'll see that it's created kind of an awkward rotation for us. That's not the kind of orientation that we'd expect for a bone that's going to handle the body of the character. So I'm going to zero out that rotation, and I can just do that by clicking this little back arrow here that's going to reset the rotation of that joint. And that's basically going to align it to the world. And you can see now we have this joint aligned to the world, which is kind of what I'd want for a mesh like this. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and continue making more joints. We're going to essentially create a setup that handles basically like a clavicle, shoulder, elbow, and hand type joints. So let's go ahead and to create that properly centered, again, because we have this sort of like multiple layered setup. If you had like a character that like just a humanoid, for example, that's just like a watertight mesh sort of thing, you'd pretty easily just be able to create a joint using the center projection. But because we want to be super accurate with this type of mesh setup,
Solo dime que tienen un select edge loop o algo así. Ya con eso resuelve un montón de problemas de selección.
I'm actually going to go in here and I'm just going to select these vertices in order to essentially create a joint right in the center.
Ya, porque eso, exactamente eso es lo que no. Lo que toma un montón de tiempo, porque a la hora que haces un drag and select, es fácil seleccionar un vértice que está atrás. Es bien sencillo cagarla.
And the selection tools, while in the skeleton editing mode, still need a little bit of love. You can see they're relatively crude, right? Like I'm having to make like click and drag selections. But with all those of it selected now, I can just press create and you can see it'll create a joint in the center of the body.
Bueno, no lo tiene, no tiene la herramienta para seleccionar los ring loops o quizás un grow tool o algo así. Pero bueno, ya. Es. Lo han añadido recientemente. Esto está, creo que desde la 5.5 o la 5.6, no estoy seguro.
Now I'm going to continue with the shoulder. So this would be the clavicle, right? So if I want to do the shoulder, you can see I'm kind of going into the mesh here and I can select this one here and this one there. So we have that sort of ball joint that we have there. So I can just create a joint for that as well. And it looks like I selected a wrong vert there. So I'm just going to do that. So with that done, I'll just create and I get a joint there. And right now I'm not too worried if, for example, it has the wrong parent in. I can just click and drag it and pop it in there. With this one here, I can just select the 2 points on the outside that are central, not that one. That one, I think. And I can just create a joint for that. And then last but not least, we'll do this for the hand here.
Si esto de hacer un reparen del hueso no me malogra las rotaciones, entonces excelente.
Like so. So a little bit cumbersome to make these selections in this mode. You'll see that when we're in the weight painting mode, it's a lot easier to make selections. And I'm hoping that basically all these tools will end up and eventually end up making it to the edit skeleton selection tools because it'd be pretty handy. But here we go. We have now a bunch of joints that we need. So now is the kind of time that I'd probably worry about naming and then taking a look at setting up the orientation of our joints as well. So for naming, we have a bunch of tools that we can use. I can just go in here and double click the name or press F2 while having the joint selected. And I can go ahead and name this. I'm going to call this one body. And this one I'm going to call clavicle _L. And I could go down the chain and essentially name everything. Now, one thing I do want to show you just as a few naming kind of tricks that we have in the engine that are
Eso es lo que quería saber, si tenían herramientas para al menos el naming. Ya, bueno, selección se sufre una vez y ya está, ¿no? Pero a cada rato uno va a estar, como bueno, a la hora de crear los huesos, ¿no? Ya que la sufras seleccionando y luego la sufras nombrando, ya demasiado, pues. Algo,
handy. Is I can,
algo
for
me
example,
tienes que
select
ayudar.
all of these, press
A ver.
F2 to name them, and let's imagine that we have something like a tail, and I have to name the tail like tail 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can just, for example, name it tail, and then _hash, and you'll see it'll essentially create the sort of properly ordered numbers for something like that. I could also
Excelente.
call it tail _hash hash, for example, and get 2 numbers for that if I so desire. If I hover,
Ah,
while I'm renaming stuff, if I hover over the name, you can see the type of commands that we have that are available to change names. So
bacán.
make use of those if you're trying to make a rig that has this type of that has any sort of naming convention needs. In our case, we don't have to worry about these enumerations or anything like that. We just need to create essentially names for the rest of the chain here. So in this case, I'm going to call it upper arm L, lower arm L, and I'll go with hand for the bottom one. So we've got hand. Now, you will notice that as I select the joints, which by the way, I can select by just middle clicking on them, I'm going to untoggle the vert view now, so it's a little bit easier to see. And I can select the joints, and you'll notice that we have orientation axes that are visible. They're not super visible for everyone right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and click change the axis length and the axis thickness so that we can observe them a little bit better. And you'll notice that the orientations that have been created here are a little bit all over the place, right? So we typically expect X to be going down the chain, right, along the chain, and then we can kind of choose what Y and Z ends up looking like. But we're going to want to orient these joints correctly, especially before we mirror them, right? So in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to the edit skeleton still. I'm going to go to the edit section here. And we have here a bunch of options. So we have some mirroring options. The ones that we're interested in right now are going to be the orientation options right here. So we could just tick auto orient and give it a primary axis and a secondary axis and see if it can figure it out for itself. So I'm going to go ahead and orient. I've got orient children ticked, so it should be able to do it. And let's see how it's done. So we have
Aguanta, la perdí
ticked,
eso.
so and see if it can figure it out for itself. So I'm going to go ahead and orient. I've got orient children ticked, so it should be able to do it.
Yeah.
And let's see how it's done. So we have X down the chain on all of them. We've got Y going this way, but then kind of Y flips and goes the other way here. So that might not be exactly what we want. So just to mess around with the orientation options here, I'm going to just try to orient these in a way that makes a bit more sense. And you can see these aren't bad, but you can see it's not actually using a plane as a secondary, which for something like an arm, if I ever wanted to do FK, IK and that kind of thing, I might want to align them to a plane. So I'm just going to realign them there. I might do Y minus. I'm just going to double check because I'm pretty happy with the way that this actually looks for the clavicle. So let's go ahead and check for the rest of these, if we can align them a little bit nicer. And you can see like we've got one that's okay, the other one's kind of flipped. So we can actually just come in here and just reflip these.
Oh.
However you want. That way we can stay on plane.
Supongo.
Hi, James. A quick one. We had a request if you could increase the widget size on your editor so that people can see the buttons a bit better.
Okay, it's at 1.3 already, so it's pretty cramped for me, but I'll do 1.5.
Okay.
Is that better?
Looks good to me.
Okay. So with the orientation being okay now, and I'm happy with it, I can go ahead and press accept. And now what I can do is worry about creating the mirrors for these. So yeah, remember I'm trying to keep this sort of orientation to make a little bit of sense. And I might actually, now that I'm seeing it, I might come in and adjust the orientation of this guy a little bit so that they're a little bit more aligned. So with that done, I can worry now about doing the mirroring operation. So to do that, I can choose the mirror axis that I want here. So I can mirror on X. Mirror rotation is basically the same as if you're using something like Maya or Blender, it's behavior mirroring. So it will essentially mirror so that we can animate the controls with the expected behavior that we intend. So it will essentially mean that the X axis on the right side of the character is going to be flipped and looking away from the shape. And then it will have here what you want to replace in terms of names. So underscore L is going to change the underscore. So with that, I'm just going to press mirror with the clavicle selected, and you can see we've got here the thing that we'd expect, right? So we have the joints that go with X in the opposite direction. And with that, I think we're good to go. I can press accept. And we have the joint chain that we want and expect. Perfect. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can now essentially skin these joints to the character and start editing the weights. To make sure that we can essentially get the type of deformation that we expect. So I'm going to go to the skinning tool here. And the first thing I want to do is bind skin, right? By default, the mesh is going to be bound to the root, but we have all these new bones that we've introduced, and I want to make sure that we can go ahead and deform the mesh using those bones. So I'm going to go to bind skin, and very simple options for binding here. We have the binding type that we might want. So from direct distance and geodesic voxel. So if you've used something like Mayo or Blender, I think these tools or these algorithms are available for binding. So basically the same thing. The stiffness is going to refer to essentially the fall off, the automatic fall off that's going to be applied. And then the number of the max influences, this is the max influences a vert can receive from bones. So essentially a vert could be affected by a maximum of 5 bones with this set. Now, because this is like a hard surface character, we really only need 1 max influence. So I could set that up, but I'm going to leave this like this so I can kind of show you once I bind that everything's working correctly. So it's not, if I set this up to 1, it's going to look a little bit weird. So I'm going to leave it at 5. It's not a big deal. So I'm going to select all the joints that I want to bind. And with that, I'm going ahead and with direct distance there, I'm going to press accept. And now you'll see, if I grab one of these bones, we are bound and we have some default weights that are definitely not what we want. So let's go ahead and start to take a look at the edit weights tool. So you can see we have a lot of options here on how we can edit weights. Some of them are pretty typical to what you'd use in your typical DCC, but we do have also some really nice options that I want to go over. This character might not be the best to show every single bit of the tools that I want to show you when it comes to weight painting. But once we paint this character, I'm actually going to hop onto a different character that will allow us to essentially show you some more of the some more of the tools in a little bit more depth so that we can take a look at them properly. So let's just start by getting this guy done another way, and then we can take a look at the rest of the tools in here. So we have 3 tools available for us, or 3 weight editing modes. We have brush, which is the kind of thing that you'd expect. We have a brush that you can select a joint for, and then you can paint as you'd expect. We have different types of brush mode. So we have add, replace, multiply, and relax. Relax being typically called smooth in other DCCs. But what is really, this is actually a really nice relax tool. I don't know who wrote it, but they did a really nice job. It's actually really good. The brush can also be set up to surface or volume. So just to give you a little bit of an example, on surface, it's going to stick to the surface that you're currently selecting. Whereas if I use volume and I click, it's going to use the entire volume. Now, this is actually, if you're going to paint something like this with a brush, volume is pretty handy because we have so many of these sort of like little bevels and things like that go in. Painting by surface might be a little bit tricky. So just keep that in mind. And then we also have the different display modes for the weights. So we have grayscale, which is the default that you see in here. We have ramp, which will give you color ramp that you can edit, which colors you want on each ramp, on each part of the ramp. For example, I'd usually use white for something like full influence, then maybe something a little bit more red along the way to it. So we can change those colors. And as I subtract or add, you can see those colors changing on each one of these. I also have bone colors, so we can associate a particular bone to a color, and then the mix of those colors is going to be what you see here, which can be handy. And also we have the full material, which this could be really handy, and you'll see some examples later where you're kind of trying to see how a particular deformation looks, and you want to see how the material is being affected by that deformation. Sometimes you get some, funky stuff that happens with normal maps or something like that you want to check. This sort of material is going to be really handy for you to kind of find the pose that you want and check and make sure that your skinning is actually not giving you, unfortunate shading or anything. In my case, we're going to go 0 to 1 on all of these, right? Like it's either going to be weighted to a bone or not. So we can keep it grayscale. We also have down here weight transferring options. We're not going to go over those today. I could make a separate video or something like that. It's a really nice weight transferring tool. So you can choose a source skeletal mesh and transfer the weight from that one to this one. It's a really, really nice tool, but it's...
Uy, eso suena súper útil cuando tu personaje tiene ropa y ya hiciste el skinning, ¿no? Del cuerpo. Y como es Skeletal Mesh, ya tienen la información, pasárselo a la ropa. Si es que la herramienta de transferir está buena, te ahorra un montón de tiempo y también te ahorra bastante clipeo entre meshes, así que dice que quizás hay un video después, ojalá sí lo haya.
not something we really have an example for right now. So yeah, so that's kind of like your brush tool settings. Some of these are kind of usable for brush and mesh or bone mode, but yeah, the brush options are basically just this section here, small section. We can change the radius of the brush by clicking and dragging here, or just holding B and moving left and right. And we could change the strength of the brush by holding B and going up and down. The strength of how much I add can be changed by B and left clicking up or down. And then you can change the fall off here. I'm not sure if there's a shortcut for fall off, but you can just change it down here. And yeah, like I say, we're probably not going to use the brush for something like this, but let's go ahead and use the mesh tools, which are what I really want to use. And in here, we have much more robust sort of selection tools to make, proper proper white baiting options here. So with the mesh tools, I can select verts, edges, or faces. I'm going to stick to verts for now. And once I make a selection, you'll see I have a bunch of options that I can do, right? So I can grow the selection, I can shrink it, I can flood, which is really nice if you just want to grab a...
Aquí están las herramientas de selección que... Pero, o sea, si lo tienen acá, lo podrían tener también para el esqueleto, no sé por qué. No, las dos no tienen esto, pero debe haber alguna razón de que... de tiempos de release. Seguramente. Es lo que usualmente pasa.
An entire section, like the kind of thing that I'd want to do, right? And with that, we can then add, replace, average, relax. We have normalizing, hammering, and pruning options that you're probably familiar with if you've done any weight painting before. We have really nice, which I'll show later on in a different example.
Martillazo. Súper útil.
Sort of average weighting tool here that super cool. I'll show you later on. But yeah, let's go ahead and skin this guy the way we'd expect. So I'm going to select the body first. I'm going to make a big selection to a few things that I know I want to catch on this. And I'm just going to press flood. And you can see it's basically selected the entire body section here. And we've left areas like the clavicle and that kind of thing separated. So with the body selected, I'm going to add a value of 1. And there we go. Now we have that weighted to the body with a value of 1. Next, I'm going to go to the left clavicle. And I'm quickly going to change my mode here to full material, make sure that I'm looking at the right side, because it's quite easy to to go over to this side while it's on grayscale and mess up. So yeah, we're on the right side here. And for the clavicle, basically I want to select this guy here. Make sure we're getting some of these. And down here, get some of those. And let me flood those. Definitely selected more than I wanted, so let's go ahead and be a little bit more conservative. Flood. Okay, so that's pretty good for the clavicle. So with the clavicle selected there, I'm just going to flood and add. Then I can just middle click the next bone that I want to edit. So this is going to be the upper arm. Select one vert there, flood it. Make sure that I'm selecting everything that I want the upper arm to the effect. So I'm just going to grab a bunch of all of this. Now this mesh has been made with loads of kind of separate sections, so that's why I'm kind of selecting a few verts as I go, just to make sure that I'm grabbing all the sections that I can. And with that, I'm going to flood again and add a value of 1. Now for the elbow, I can select this, this, and this, flood it up, and add. So you can see the workflow is pretty quick and easy, right? And with this, I'm just going to grab a bunch of all of this, holding shift to add to my selection here. And I'm going to flood that and add. And I can go ahead and test these rotations now, right? So I'm going to press accept so that I don't lose any of the work that I've just done. I can go back into the edit weights at any point, so don't feel like you have to make too many changes there. But with this selected, I can go to the details panel and just, for example, affect the rotation of one of these. And you can see we've got a few verts that we definitely don't want to be affecting here. And I can press the little arrow to go back to sort of my bind post. So I'm going to just rotate this down, and I'm going to fix all of these.
Ese es un clasicazo de estar haciendo skinning. Usualmente recuerdo haber visto un video en probablemente de una clase pirateada de CG Masters, donde el pata siempre decía, mira, seleccionas todo y le pones uno al root. Y luego va subiendo, ¿no? Como que, spine, y luego brazos, y luego manos, y luego piernas, etcétera, ¿no? Y así vas. Te ahorras este problema de dejar que la herramienta automática te haga casi todo el trabajo. Pero era un workflow, me parecía súper antiguo, ¿no? Porque el man tenía como 20 años de experiencia. Así que luego vi otro que era con layers, que era más o menos el mismo workflow, pero te bajabas un plugin para Maya para tener layers de skin weights de los pesos, ¿no? Pero bueno.
Awkward verts here. So I'm going to select these. I'm going to flood it. I'm going to go back to the body and add a value of 1 to the body. And then you notice in here, there's like a little sleeve for that joint. And that should be really on the clavicle. So I'm going to select the clavicle, select one of those verts, flood it, and add a value. So you can see pretty easy skinning, and we fixed, I think, the issues that we had pretty nicely. So we can go ahead and zero these rotation out, go back to the bind post, and accept that. So we've got our body and our left side essentially done. Now let's go ahead and mirror the weights over to the other side. So to do that, I'm going to go back into the edit weights tool. And with the mesh selected here, I'm just going to select all of the verts for the mesh. And I'm going to go to the mirror section here, and the mirror plane axis is going to be X. We're going to go positive and negative. And I can just press mirror. And you should see now that I have my weighting correctly set up on the other side as well. Okay. So that's basically how we can weight this character. So let's go ahead and just double check everything. Really nice and simple. As I say, like the selection tools for weight painting are really nice in comparison to the edit skeleton tools for selecting. So yeah, I'm sure they'll come to that tool set soon enough. But for now, it's not too hard to just go in there and get a bit dirty, get your hands a bit dirty, and select a few verts. And like I say, if you really hate this, you can always do this part in something like Maya and then bring the mesh in and start rigging straight away. But I kind of wanted to give you the option of like, you can do all of this in Unreal already. Okay, so I'm just gonna reset these rotations. Not that they matter. It's just an OCD thing, I guess, at this point. So yeah, with the character basically set up like this, I actually want to go and look at another character so I can show you a few more of the tools and how they work a little bit nicer. So I'm going to go and find we have a a mannequin in this. Let me see if we have this project. Don't have many in this project. Okay. Let me open up a different project, and I'll take you through. Yeah, I'll take you through essentially some of the other tools with a character that makes a little bit more sense. So I'm gonna load up another project. I'm trying to think of one that. Well, I just made this workshop example project, so I think we might as well grab that one. And I'll remember to adjust the widget size. Okay, so we have Quinn, which is going to be a perfect character for something like this. I am going to adjust my widget size. So 1.5 is what I did before. There we go. Should be nice and visible for you guys. And I'm going to open up. We can open up. Do we only have the simple ones in this one? We do. It's a little bit annoying, actually. But I can still show you that some of these features. It's just not going to be as nice as I was hoping to. Let me see if I can actually open a different project. I have a really good example. I just don't have the the right project for it right now, apparently. Let me open this one up. Let's see, this one.
Esa es la clásica de enseñar en vivo de tengo los proyectos, pero ¿cuál de todos es?
And we have mannequins.
Sobre todo cuando orgánicamente terminas en un
meshes.
En una parte que quizás no estaba planeada al 100%.
Take a look at Quinn.
Pero el tema sale y tienes la respuesta, pero
yeah, we can essentially take a look at some of the features that we have here. So I'm going to turn on the bone visualization inside of this window. So I'm going to click the little bones here and show all hierarchy. And essentially what I want to show you is you can see we have a load of leaf joints here that essentially actually get driven by rotations. You can see this joint here is actually moving forward, but we're not getting much deformation there. And I'd like to, for example, exaggerate this deformation a little bit. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can do that. So I'm going to go to edit weights and I'm going to click or middle click the joint that I want to edit. And you can see we do have a little bit of influence on this. I could make it strong. I'm going to see if there's a joint here that doesn't have any. Let's just look at this. So if I wanted to exaggerate the influence that something like this has, I could quickly, for example, I mean, I could just go ahead and draw. Use the brush here, right? And essentially grab that. Then I can hold shift to relax things and, you know, I can exaggerate things a little bit more. And then I can just grab this joint and rotate it. Let's see. Let's see how my edits are affecting things. So now you can see I get a bigger bicep because I've, you know, manually painted these values. Like I say, the relax tool does a really good job at figuring out to what other bones the influences should go to. I know in Maya that can be a little bit tricky, so I really like this tool specifically for that. Just gonna take this out a bit so I can make it a bit more easily.
Let's continue.
Yeah, I can, like I say, grab and add influence really strongly with the brush. I can also use something like this. So I'm going to show you a couple of tricks that I like to use. So for example, I'll find a joint like this and I'll select a birth that's close enough to its location, like as close as I can get it. And then I'm going to grow the selection. And I just want this that you'll see that basically when I rotate this arm up, I want this to just basically bulge out a lot, right? So I can select this and I'll find, like I say, a rotation point. Sorry, let me just grab this rotation point from a selection that's as close to the bone as I can. So I'm going to grow that selection and I can rotate it up and then I can start, for example, adding a little bit of value onto here. You can see that's already quite strong, right? Probably has taken it to 1, but let's add it fully, right? Let's just make that full selection there. So now if I wanted to make a nice smooth transition out of this, what I can do is I can convert my selection to a border, which is going to select the verts along the border of my selection. Then I can grow the selection from there. And now I can, for example, relax things from here. And you can see how nice the relaxing algorithm is, that it just does a really nice job at redistributing that influence with the rest of the bones.
Uf,
And now,
trucazo, ¿ah?
as I rotate, you can see I get a much bigger bulge with essentially the nice. And now,
Tan
just
trucazo que
the
lo quiero
selection from
asimilar
border
de
of my
nuevo.
selection. Do it selection.
Acá.
So now if I wanted to make a nice smooth transition out of this, what I can do is I can convert my selection to a border, which is going to select the verts along the border of my selection. Then I can grow the selection from there. And now I can, for example, relax things from here, from
El
there
botón de
of my
border.
selection. I can convert my selection to a border, which
Ahí
is going
está.
to select the verts
Soy
along the
ciego.
border of my selection. Then I can grow the selection from there. And now I can, for example, relax things from here. And you can see how nice the relaxing algorithm is, that it just does a really nice job at redistributing that influence with the rest of the bones. And now, as I rotate, you can see I get a much bigger bulge with essentially the nice values that I wanted. Probably still do a little bit more relaxing on these. So let's go ahead and relax this a bit. And you can see there, as I rotate here, we get a much nicer deformation. And that relax tool is really handy to kind of smooth out those. The idea for me is basically thinking in those sort of like big, broad motions. What do I want to do? And then kind of let the relax tool handle it, and it does a pretty good job. Let's take a look at some other things that we can do.
Ese es un buen truco.
One thing that I really love is, let's rotate this. I'm going to do this on the other side, and I'm going to do the same, right? I'm going to add a bunch of value to this joint here. Let's grow the selection a bit. I'm going to add, basically trying to, make something that looks a little bit broken, just so it's a little bit more obvious. And the tool that I really want to show you is down here. We basically have what is akin to, I guess, the component editor in something like Maya, where you have basically what influences are affecting a particular vert. And if I have this whole selected thing, instead of giving me like this massive list, it kind of gives me the averages of each one of these bones and how they're affecting the verts that are selected here. And what's beautiful about this is that it's really nice to just go like, okay, well, I actually want to add it a little bit more to this one here. So I can click and drag on these and kind of dynamically see how my weights are being redistributed and normalized across the average of the weights that I have. So I'm going to go ahead and just find the twist, for example, here, and you can see I can just click and drag this and kind of see how it all averages out. So I can just adjust the weighting that I kind of want as an average. And once again, even if you destroy this like this, like the relax tool is usually pretty good at figuring out what it is that you were trying to do. So once I've done that, I can just relax things. And you can see, pretty nice job already. You might have to clean up a little bit around here. But now you can see I've got that weight figured out. And if you've ever tried to use something like the component editor in Maya, it could be really slow and cumbersome. But this tool here is actually really nice to adjust your weights and kind of dynamically see how that weight is being redistributed. Do you have any other tools that I want to show? I think they're the kind of two big ones that I wanted to show within this mode.
Hey, James, before we move on,
yeah,
we do have a quick question that was related to what you're doing.
Yeah.
Mike Richter says he thinks he blinked and missed it. What was moving the bicep joint out when you rotated the lower arm?
Oh,
The controller would be able to automate that kind of thing, but it looked like it still moved. Is it just in this SK asset editor or what?
yeah. So you'll notice, just to make it clear, I think what you're referring to is as I rotate this bone here, you're seeing that there's other bones that are basically being moved and adjusted. Let me just come out of the weight editing mode so we can see this a bit clearly. Every time I do this, everyone asks that. So, but yeah, as I rotate this, you can see that those bones are actually being moved, right? Those leaf bones. You can do this with control rig. In fact, we're actually going to show you how we handle something like this in control rig.
Excelente.
Currently, what this is using is a post-processing animation blueprint that's driving some movement based on RBF data, so radial base fields. That essentially kind of, it's a little bit like centering keys, but a little bit more robust. But like I say, we probably wouldn't even use this method anymore for something like this. We'd use something like spherical pose reader in something like control rig. And we're actually going to show you that on day, I think 3. So you'll be able to see how something like this can be set up. So yeah, this is essentially intrinsic right now to this mesh through this animation post-process blueprint that's running here. Find that for you real quick if you really want to see it.
And then if you don't mind, we can, could we really quickly rapid fire some questions? I want to know, I don't want to cut you off time-wise, so.
Yeah, so, but basically this is what's doing the work there. So that's the meat and potatoes of it. Yeah, go ahead and rapid fire.
Okay, so first question we want to rapid fire on this one. Is there a bind pose that we can revert back to, or is it just zeroing out rotations?
The bind pose that you can revert to, you can just zero out. Making these rotations doesn't actually mean anything. It's not like in Mayo where like you could really mess things up by just adjusting things. This doesn't really mean anything in this editor. I can close that and reopen the skeletal mesh and be in the same spot that I was in. So if you want to revert to it, you can just close and open again, and here we are, back into bind pose. Like I say,
Okay.
the state is kind of separated in Unreal, so you're very flexible as to how you edit it. Oh, there is some tools that I want to show you. I almost forgot. But yeah, next.
Are weights automatically dynamically normalized? Chase is actually typing out an answer on this one, but so let's skip this one. Is there a process of skinning, export, saving in case you need to unbind the character and change the joint's position? There's also a follow-up question that is there a way to save and load skinning information? Same kind of question.
As far as I know, there's no way of saving and loading skinning information as such. But what you can do is basically you can the skinning information is saved in the skeletal mesh, and what you can do is just save the skeletal mesh out as a version and then apply it as a weight transfer using this tool here later on. So it's intrinsic to the actual data on the mesh, so you can just leverage that.
Okay, I'm gonna answer those. 2 for 1. Is there a way to hide part of the mesh in the viewport to access more easily or hidden geometry?
Esa es una súper buena pregunta.
Not super easily right now. So the kind of workaround that I would do is use a material, right? So I can let me just cancel this. I can isolate a particular material like this. And if I go to edit weights, I presume, yeah, that brings the whole mesh back. If you're weight painting, I'm not sure if we can do that too easily right now. But I'm sure that will be coming because that is
no he encontrado. He buscado la forma de ocultar ciertas partes para poder hacer weight painting más fácil, pero no encontré.
All right.
Muy en la infancia está la herramienta.
I might be wrong on that. There might be a way. I definitely don't know of it. But I don't think.
Yeah, it looks like Chase is typing in the answer on some of these as well.
Save me, Chase.
So, last one. How do you change the joint position if you have already skinned the character?
So you could just come back to the edit skeleton and just press edit, and you can go ahead and edit the joint position like this, however you want. I'm not going to save this, but I can go ahead and come in here and edit the position of any joint. And I think there is an update children as well if you want to bring the children along. So you just go back to the edit skeleton now.
Okay, so the next question. I think Chase stopped, or this question popped up again. I think it was are weights automatically or dynamically normalized?
I think there is yes by default, but there is a tick box to normalize things as well somewhere. I don't remember, but yes, basically they'll get normalized by default. Yeah, so for example, if for whatever reason you came with joints that weren't normalized, you can select a bunch of them normalize joints based on here. You can also prune specific based on averages. So if you know, for example, that all of these verts definitely shouldn't have influence of the clavicle, I can just come in here and prune weights like that. Or I can just prune all of the verts for the mesh that have a value of less than 0.01 from here, for example. So pruning's also pretty easy from there. But normalization's right there, but by default it will do it.
Yeah, I'll say I rarely like think about it. It's more like working in post normalization in Maya. I think I've actually only hit that button a few times, and I've done a lot of assets in here. So
I've never hit it.
Yeah.
It's like it's such a second thought for me at this point.
Somebody asked about locking too, weight locking. We have added that. It's just not in 5.6. So
Yes.
you can imagine that's there. It works exactly kind of how you would imagine it would in Maya. We kind of matched similar functionality, and it's pretty great.
Nice. That's exciting.
Okay.
I don't know about
Again, rapid fire. Can we select edge loops instead of vertices?
No, so right now you'll notice that Unreal Engine's a game engine, right? So like we're trying speed is basically the thing it's designed for. So component editing and that kind of stuff is historically been tricky. So right now, like we can only access basically the triangulated mesh that the engine creates. Although it is coming, it is being worked on that we can work on quads and proper selection methods. It's just not here quite. So just a heads up on that. It is a problem that Epic is aware of, and it is being actively worked on, just not here, at least not in 5.
Bueno, al menos están chambeando al respecto, ¿no? Pero ¿cuándo llegará ese update?
I think this is all one
Esa es
question.
la pregunta.
Do you explain why there is a different joint chaining between root joint and hand joint considered to other 3D programs, or when we consider it to other 3D programs? So I think that's all the same.
Oh, so are we talking about these guys? Like these joints here? So they're not actually, so these joints are separate they're essentially utility joints is what I'd call them. They're just joints so that you can easily attach and animate things like a gun that you attach or something like that. And they're parented outside of the hack of the hand because they might, it might come in handy in certain scenarios. I wouldn't worry too much about that. If the other question was why do we have the root at the base of the character and not in the hips, which is what a lot of other sort of setups have, it's basically for games we tend to handle the root at the base of the character because it's where we align this with essentially capsule movement of a character and that kind of thing. And if we extract root motion data, we actually want to do it from a root that's basically aligned with that capsule so that there's no kind of discrepancy there. So heads up on that.
All right, and then the last one before we jump right back in is, can we isolate a few areas and paint the skin like the jaw and inner mouth area?
Yeah, so that's the same as the hide-in one. It's not there yet, but I'm sure it'll come.
Okay. Then we are ready to resume.
One last part that I wanted to show about editing weights in Unreal, which I absolutely love, and again, this is a really kind of part of the power of being sort of in situ with the, being able to do this all in real time and with the, final output of what you're going to do, is that we can, I'm going to go into brush mode, we can load any pose or animation that we want into this and even actually tag into whatever's happening at runtime or in a particular animation in sequence and edit weights with that information. So if I go to my details panel, my preview settings here, you can see I've got a preview controller. I have access to a bunch of things. So I can use a running instance. So this is if I'm running the game and I want to check how the deformation is happening with a lot of the logic of animation that I might be having underneath, I can adjust weight painting with that. In this case, for example, we'll take a look at something like a jump. So let's find jump. So I can see that this jump animation, I know that around this frame, the skinning on the shoulder is a little bit funky. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust it. And I can do that. I mean, I could do it if I wanted to while it's moving. I don't recommend it. But if you just pause it, you can actually, find the pose that you want and, adjust your weights accordingly. And like I say, you can attach this visualization to any running instance. So I could be in game playing the game with all the logic that might be running underneath to
Eso sí
reach the
está
final pose of the
bacán.
character and adjust my skin weights from here. And this
También
is
lo
something that
que
I
sí
do
está bien
quite
en
a
el
lot
juego,
now, where, for
la
example, I
cosita.
find that, there's a particular pose in which it might not be driven specifically by one animation, but by a bunch of animations being combined together. So I'll just tag into the running instance and adjust the weighting as I need to from here. So really, really powerful tool to essentially adjust things on the fly. And that's really it, I think, for me for the skin weighting tools. I think it's time for us to hop into an actual control rig and yeah, do things from that. So let's go ahead, and I'm gonna go back to that other project that we supplied. And essentially, all I need to do is with my character here that I've created, I'm gonna go to the one that I've already made, just in case I made any mistakes throughout the workshop. And all I need to do is just right-click and create a control rig on it. So I can just right-click on the skeletal mesh that I want to make a control for, create, and control rig. And I'm gonna call this CR for control rig, and this will be workshop example. Okay, so let's take a look at a control rig and dissect this a little bit more depth than what we did before when we just looked at things. So on the left hand side here we have the viewport. This is the character and current hierarchy that we have loaded in. On the top here we have a few buttons that relate to the overall settings of the asset. So we have class settings here if we want to change things about class. But we don't really need to worry about that too much. Really, what we care about the most is this section here, which is the forward solve. The graph, which currently is the forward solve graph, which is why I got confused there. But we have the graph here. This is where we're basically going to do all of our work. And then on the bottom left here, we have our hierarchy, the current hierarchy that we have here, the execution stack, so what's actually going on in the control rig. The curve container, so if your character has blend shapes or any attribute or custom curves that you've added in there, you can grab them from there. And then we also have the My Blueprint section, which if you're familiar with the engine as a whole, it's basically like any other My Blueprint section where we can store, our created functions, variables, and things like that. And you'll see how this all kind of lives together as I go through this example. Now, I want to keep things somewhat simple for this first control rig that we're going to do. So we're going to take an approach that isn't perhaps the approach that I would take for a typical, for what I'd call now a typical control rig, or that leverages all of the really, really cool things that control rig can do. But it will serve as a kind of like, dipping our toes into this kind of new way of thinking. So we're going to keep things like, controls and bone hierarchy separate, things like that we don't actually have to do with control rig. And I'm sure as the workshop progresses and you see more examples, you'll see how these things work. But the important thing here is that I'm going to look at the graph for more than anything. And we have our forward solve here, which is the typical node or the typical event that you'd expect in a normal rig where the controls drive the bones, right? We also have other events like the backward solve, where the bones would drive the controls, right? And you could use this to bake, for example, mocap data back to your control rig. And then we also have something like a construction event, where, and this is kind of like the super powerful thing for me of control rig, where we can essentially create a procedural control rig that can attach itself to multiple skeletal meshes, skeleton structures, or anything like that. Now remember, control rig is kind of agnostic of the skeleton, or can be agnostic of the skeleton that you supply, so that's why the power of this is going to come. But like I say, we're going to keep it super simple and as familiar as I can. So let's go ahead and just look at this from what a more traditional type of rig would look like. So the first thing I'm going to need, so we're just going to make a rig for this little guy here. And the first thing I'm going to need is a control to drive the root. So I'm going to select the root here in my rig hierarchy. I'm going to right click, put a new element and new control. And this has created a control for me and placed it at the root. And not only that, but it's also essentially aligned and set up the transforms that it needs to essentially zero everything out and be aligned with the bone. Now you'll notice that it's also created a name for me and added like a little underscore control, which is quite handy. And with this control selected, I just want to take a look at here, the details panel, and see the kind of things that we can do. So on the control section itself, we have the type of control that it can be. You can change this from an animation control to a visual cue or a proxy control. We don't have to dig too deep into what they do, but animation control is what we're going to keep here. The type of value that it is, so it can have a transform to it, but it can also just be a bool if you want it to be a bool. It can be a bunch of other stuff. So you don't have to necessarily have a transform as the type of control that it is. You can choose whether you use preferred rotation order or not, and what the rotation order might be, and then channel filtering if you want to, for example, exclude a channel from being used by this control. Now, right below it, we have this section here, which is the transform section, and this one's really important. I'm going to have to make it really big because the widget size here. But we have a bunch of different types of transforms. So I'm going to go over these because this is a little bit of a gotcha, and we might have a few better examples. I've got an initial transform, which is the transform, like the default initial transform of the rig at rest, right? So this, you can think of this as the rest pose or the reference pose. The current transform, which is, if I move things, what transform it's currently in. So you can see the initial transform hasn't changed, but the current one has because I've moved it. If I were to compile the rig again, we snap back to our initial transform. And then we have here the offset transform. Now, the offset transform is essentially a transform that goes, think of it as kind of like a level above your normal or initial transform, which allows you to essentially position the joint wherever you want it in the world, set that as its offset transform, and it means that you can zero out your default transform here, but have the offset a little bit akin to creating a group in Maya and having the control childed underneath. We don't need that group. We can just use this offset transform to do basically the same job. I think Maya now actually has an offset matrix that handles this exactly the same way, so you might be familiar with that. But basically, it's think of it as the group above your control in a typical sort of rig setup in a dependency graph. And then we have min and max values that we can set. Then we have properties about the shape as well. So I can change the properties of the shape itself. So I'm going to change this now to square, rounded square, thick I'm going to go for. And then I can change the color of it. Let's make it yellow. And I'm going to change the scale of the shape itself. So this doesn't affect the transform of the control itself. This is just the shape or the visual representation of the control. So I'm going to change this to a value of something like 6, I think, and make it nice and big. And I'm going to go ahead and compile that, and we have our control for the root. Now, currently this control isn't assigned to anything. If I move it, it doesn't drive anything. So let's go ahead and make this control drive a bone. So in order to do that, if you think typically, right, the way in which we think about doing something like this in Maya is we'd set up something like a parent constraint, right? And we could set up a parent constraint. If I find it here, if I can type. We could set up a parent constraint, but I find this just a little bit misleading in controller because, again, we don't have any form of dependencies here. We're just the logic and the hierarchy is actually set up. So we're not really creating a connection there. Really what we're doing is something a little bit more simple and faster, which is what I'm going to show you now. So I can, for example, say I can set the transform of this bone to follow whatever this control is doing, right? Or to inherit or to get the value of that control and, assign it to that bone. So to do that, I can just grab the root, I can drag it into my graph, and I'm going to set the bone. And you can see it creates a node here that's going to set the transform on a bone. And the bone that it's going to set it on, or the item that it's going to set it on, is this, which is a bone called root, right? And this has been filled in for me automatically by just dragging it in like this. So now you'll see that it's expecting a value, a transform, right? So to give it the value of the control, I can just drag my control in, and I'm going to get the transform of this control. And you can see it's given me the transform of the control of the root control. And I can grab this transform and apply it as the value of the transform that I'm going to set on the bone. Now, in order for this node to execute the logic that's in here, I need to use the execution pin here. So this big little triangle, well, big triangle here, like the big node. Once I connect it up, that will now execute the logic on this node. And now you'll see that as I drag the control, the bone follows along. Perfect. So let's go ahead and do the same for the body and see if we can get it to work. So go to the body, I'm going to right click, I'm going to make a new element and a new control. I'm going to call it body control. You can see it's there, it's just hidden behind. And I'm going to go ahead and change the shape of it to a circle. I'm going to make it a circle thick. I'm going to scale it on the transform, on the shape itself for like 10. Or maybe that's too much. 6, 4 maybe. Yeah, something like that. And actually, I want this to be rotated upwards so it's a little bit easier to select the other stuff later. So I'm going to rotate 90 degrees on the shape. That's the wrong 90. Add it on X. I will change the color of this. So let's make it yellow as well, because it's a center control, and I don't make the rules of rigging, but they have to be yellow. And okay, with that done, now I just need to make sure that this bone for the body follows what the control is telling it to do. So once again, I'm going to grab the body. I'm going to set the bone transform. And I'm going to set that transform to be that of this control. So I'm going to grab this control, get the control, and collect the transform. And the transform really is just rotation, translation, and scale, right? So it's nothing. It's all these values put into one. And I'm going to connect it up. And now I can move my body independent from the root. So now I have two very simple sort of FK setups, but you'll notice that because the hierarchy of my controls and set up the same as the bone, as I move the root, it's not moving the body. So this is where I can literally just drag this in underneath the root and we're working, right? Because there's no direct dependency going on here, like all these transforms can, update themselves pretty easily, and I can make those space changes essentially happen pretty easily without having to go back, reset offsets, and all that kind of stuff that you typically do in something like a dependency graph. You can just, all this logic, the hierarchy and the logic that nothing's dependent directly, right? So it's all separate and easy to work with. Okay, so now let's go ahead and make an FK change basically for the clavicle, upper arm, lower arm, and hand. Okay. But if we were to do this, for each one of these pretty slowly, like I'm going to set bone. This is going to be something that's fairly repetitive and something that we're probably going to do quite a lot anyways. So instead of running it like this, let's go ahead and do it with a function that's going to look at all the bones that it needs to do this for and then do it automatically, sorry. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a function. So I'm going to go to the My Blueprint section here. And I'm going to go to the Functions tab here, and I'm going to add a new function. And this one's going to be my example FK check. And you'll see it's got an entry and a return, and basically we're going to put logic in here. So what's the logic that we want to do? So what I want to do is for each one of these bones, I want to grab its respective control, which I've not created yet, I will. But I want to grab its respective control and make sure that it gets driven by it. So in order to do this, I'm just going to first create the control. So I'm going to shift select all of these. I'm going to create new element control. And you'll see it even replicates the hierarchy for me. I'm going to put this underneath the body. And let's go ahead and set up the shapes for these. So I'm going to grab all of these and change them to circles. I'm going to rotate them 90 on Y. And I'm going to scale them probably just on Z to 5 so they're nice and easy to select. And then the clavicle here, I'm just going to move it up and out. So I'm going to potentially make it a little bit smaller, maybe 0.6. And I'm going to, move it out in Z. And again, I'm only moving the shape, the visual representation of this. You can see the transform is still staying where it should be. So now I've got to easily select the whole clavicle there. With all of these selected, I'm just going to change the color as well to something that feels a bit more blue and left side for me. So there we go. We have it there. So now we have all our control. So what we want again is all of these bones to follow all of these controls, right? So in order to do that, I'm going to grab all the bones that I want to do this for. I'm going to click and shift select to the last child. And I'm going to drag them in and I'm going to create an item array. And you can see now I have all the items that are all the bones that I have selected. So the clavicle, the arm, the lower arm, and the hand. And with this item array, I'm just going to drag out of it. And I'm going to do a for each loop. Now, you'll notice that with this, I've kind of just hard-coded the bones that I'm going to use. What if I wanted to use these not just for the left side, but also the right side, right? So instead of using this array, I'm actually going to delete that. I just did it so that I got the node nicely set up. And I'm going to add an entry into this function so that we can feed the bones that are actually going to be affected by this. So with the entry selected, I can just add a new input by clicking the little plus button here on the details panel. And this is going to be the bones. And the type of variable that I need to pass through to this, or the type of data that I need to pass through, is going to be a rig element key. And a rig element key is basically anything control that you can see in the hierarchy here, right? So any element of the rig that we can use. Now, this bone is currently set up to just be a single bone. I'm going to make sure that it's an array, so I can put multiple bones in here. So with this here, I'm going to click array, and now I have multiple bones available. So like I say, so now I'll essentially feed into these this function the bones that I want to do this for. And I also need the controls that I'm going to use to drive these bones. So we're going to make another argument here. And I'm going to call it controls. And they're also going to be a rig element key. So what do we want to do? For each one of the bones that come in, I want to grab the bone that you're currently looking at. And I'm going to set transform. If I can type, I'll find it. So set transform. So I'm going to, once we come into the function, we're going to execute this set transform. Now, the value of this transform is going to be that of the control that corresponds to the same bone in the array. So I'm going to get the controls. I'm going to do at, and I'm going to do it at the index that I'm currently looking at in this loop. So for each of the bones, get the bone that you're currently looking at and find the corresponding control. And from this, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to get transform. We'll do the same thing that we were doing with the body and the root. And that's what I'm going to set as the transform on the bone. So that's the transform that I'm setting. Now this return node needs to be used. So what we're going to do is we can't put it inside the loop because we don't want to return values as the loop goes through. In fact, this will error out. Once this is finished, I'm going to return. So once we finish the loop, I'm going to return it. Now you'll notice that I have quite a lot of spaghetti already. So one thing to clean this up is I can just search get bones. And you'll see I've got the input arguments here, and I can use that as a variable to just connect it up. And we'll go get controls just to clean it up. All right, so now there's a bit less spaghetti all over the place. But yeah, basically we have this concept of, by the way, this is what I've just done here is the same thing as dragging these in and connecting them. But basically I have a function that's going to grab the bones, and for each one of those bones, it's going to set the transform to be that of the control at the same index as that bone. Right? So if I compile this now, I'm going to go back to my forward solve, and I'm going to go ahead and grab my example FK chain function. I'm going to drag it in, and you'll see it can execute the function, but also is asking for what bones and what controls do I want to do this for. So just like we did before, in this case, I want to do it for all of these bones. So I'm going to click and select all of them, create an item array, and I care about the order that I'm doing this in. We'll show you much more robust ways of doing this in the coming days, but for now, as long as the order is correct, this will be fine. So the clavicle, upper arm, lower arm, and hand, that's going to be our bones. And our controls are going to be the clavicle to the hand, respectively. And again, just make sure that the order is exactly the same. So clavicle, upper arm, lower arm, and hand. Perfect. So now as I connect these up and I execute that function, I have rigged this as an FK system now with one click. And this is easily extendable to anything else that I create. So let's go ahead and now essentially make the setup for the other side. So we'll go ahead and mirror these controls. Like I say, normally we wouldn't set up a control rig like this. Sorry, I just accidentally completely undid my hierarchy, and somehow I messed it up. So let me just reset this up properly. Oh, I don't know what I did there. Let's recreate these real quick. Unfortunately, my undo in there didn't seem to work, so we'll do this really quickly. Clavicle, I'll set to 0.6, and I'll move it out. There we go. Back where we were. And because these have the same names, I don't even have to set anything else up. Okay, so we're back to where we were. Sorry, I don't know why those controls ended up getting unparented and undoable. But yeah, so now let's go ahead and do the right side. So I can go ahead and select all of these, and I can right click and I can mirror. And this is going to mirror the controls over for me. So the mirror axis that I want is X, the axis to flip, I'll leave it Z, and I'm going to search for _L_ and replace it with _R_ to do the right side. Now you'll notice that it has created the controls, right? But you'll notice that, well, a couple of things. The shape transforms haven't mirrored through. This is something that's currently being worked on and will get fixed really soon. We've got the wrong colors, so I'll make them the right color. But yeah, you'll notice that the shape transforms haven't mirrored. So we're going to have to recreate these transforms. So let's go ahead and set a 90 value there. We'll set that to 5. And we'll do the same with the clavicle here. But then the other thing that you'll notice is that the orientation is actually following, it's mirrored, it's not mirrored by behavior, right? Like we'd expect for something like this. You can see the X axis is going that way, whereas this one's going down the chain. So we want to go ahead and fix that. So I'm going to select all of these and Shift P to unparent them. And then with all of them selected, I'm going to right click and set offset transform from closest bone. So that's going to find the closest bone to the control transform and make sure that its offset is set up to that bone specifically. So if I click that, you'll notice that now all of these controls have the correct orientation for this. And now I can just quickly reset the hierarchy up. And now with this done, I can also put it inside of the body. And I think the clavicle, I still haven't done the scale and transform. So let's set this to 0.6, I think we did. And we'll bring it up to, what value did we do? 27. We'll do 27 here. We'll do 27 or minus 27 on this side. And basically now, all we have to do is ask it to do the same logic that we're doing here for the FK chain, but on the right side. So in order to do that, I can just duplicate my chain or my function, sorry. And now I'll just feed the bones and controls that correspond to the right side. So I'm going to grab all the bones from clavicle to the hand on the right side and create an item array. Just double check that the order is correct. And I'm going to do the same for the right side for the controls. So we'll check that that's correct again. And now I can connect the bones to the bones and the controls to the controls. And as I connect everything up, I've rigged the right side as quick as you just saw.
Claro, facilito.
Now,
Bien
we've got
rápido
3
lo he
minutes,
hecho.
so there's one last thing I kind of want to show you is that, remember, there's no
Wait.
dependency being created here.
James, we can run over.
Okay. I mean, 3 minutes is enough, so don't worry. So there's no dependency being created here, right? So we don't, we're just passing values through and updating the value on the bones here. So we can manipulate this as it goes into the values, right? So let's, for example, look at this body. I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit. And you can see we're feeding in the set transform to the bone directly. So one-to-one, we're grabbing the transform of the control and setting it to the bone. Instead of doing that, let's go ahead and we'll pipe the translation, and we're going to do something to the translation. So we're just going to say, okay, why don't we spring interpret? So we're interpolating on a spring. and make the translation that value. So we're getting the transform of the control, but then doing something to it and plugging it in. Remember, there's no dependency, there's no connection really being created here, so I can do whatever I want. So now you'll see that as I move the control, there's a little bit of a lag and a delay, right? And let's, for example, exaggerate that a bit. Let's make the strength of this 2, and then I'm going to bring the critical dampen to 0.3 so that we do something super obvious. But now I can do something like this, where like I can get a little bit of overlap and bounce to my character, right? And I can do that. Like currently, I don't have anything plugged in from the rotation. So right now, rotating this control won't rotate the character, or the body at least, because there's nothing connected there. But I could pass this rotation through a spring interpolate of its own. I'll make a bit of room here. And do the same thing. We'll set the strength to, and we'll set that to 4, and then set this to 0.5. And now as I rotate the character, you can see we get a really nice sort of like settle. Am I optimized for video? Can you guys actually see that? Yeah, I am. Okay. So you should be able to see that we've got a nice sort of settle there. Let's set the strength to 1, so it's super strong and obvious. So really slow, right? But all this is to say, and this is again not something you have to do directly, but all this is to say that, like, again, like the power of decoupling these dependencies, right? Like of running the logic separate from the actual hierarchy itself, that we can actually start doing these things and get crazy with it. So yeah, I think that's the last thing I wanted to show you. Just a really simple, kind of easy setup to do something like this. But should hopefully help you kind of understand the sort of control rig way of doing things. Because again, like if this was a parent constraint, you couldn't really do something like this, right? And especially not as easily, right? So yeah, I think that's it for this session. We've made like a really, really simple control rig. Again, we've done it in a way that it's, I think, a little bit more traditional, right? We've got a hierarchy here for the bones, and then we've got a hierarchy for the controls here. We don't have groups because we're using offset transforms, so that's already a little bit different to the way the kind of most rigs that you see these days. But the hierarchy hasn't been created dynamically. There's nothing procedural about this rig. It's kind of a one-off rig for this character. And as the days come, we're going to increase in complexity with these things. So we're going to do things, the more control rig way of doing things, where we're going to be importing the hierarchy so that we can assign this control rig to any hierarchy that comes through, and basically making it more agnostic to the characters that we're going to be working on, and more sort of universal rigs that we're able to make for everything. So yeah, I hope this was helpful, and yeah, I think this is the end for me. Thanks, everyone.
Larguito la charla, pero bacán, bacán. Yo creo que estaba muy, muy buena. Ahora, de lo que veo de este workshop, es que solamente se vuelve más complicado. Lo cual, bacán. El chiste era aprender algo. Algo, al menos para mí, nuevo. A ver, ¿cuál toca? No creo que lo vea hoy día, pero ese fue todo el día 1. El día 2 es un video, creo que de 2 horas. Sí, 2 horas y media. De biped rigging, que tenemos parte 1, parte 2 y parte 3. De lo que hablaba, ¿no? Del modular rigging, que era bastante más amigable de usar, entre comillas. Pero bueno. Entonces, dejaré esto por acá. Veré qué tal va. Y bueno, probablemente siga viendo esto, ya sea en mi tiempo libre o si no, streameando. Éxitos, gente.